When I think about the influential people in the Bible, I think none of them behaved in the way that we Western missionaries do today. One, they didn't do their ministry on the back of a lot of resources. And two, they didn't introduce a foreign language. They were using the language of the people there. So the model of vulnerable mission in the scriptures is very normal.
The Mission Matters podcast is a partnership between 1615 and Missio Nexus, who have a shared passion to mobilize the people of God to be a part of His mission.
Well, hello and welcome once again to the Mission Matters podcast. I am Matthew Ellison, and you know what I'm going to say. I am joined by my good friend and co-host, Ted Esler. How's it going, brother?
It's going real well. A little warm here in the home office today, but other than that, it's great. Probably not as hot as it is over in, say, Central Africa.
That's probably true. I think you're probably right. We got it good. So today we're joined by Jim Harries, a key figure with the Vulnerable Mission movement. Jim has spent decades living and working in East Africa, advocating for a radical shift in how we approach cross-cultural ministry. He contends that true partnership only happens when we're willing to step out of our positions of power and communicate in the heart language. It's a conversation about humility, sustainability, and what it really looks like to serve without Western resources as a safety net. Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Matt. Good to be with you.
I should have said East Africa. I said Central Africa. Sorry about that, Jim. Hopefully the tech will work well for us on this call. It's a global call. Jim, let's start out. Could you give us a definition of vulnerable mission? And then also talk a little bit about the network you've created.
Yeah, Ted, sure. We define vulnerable mission as being mission. We're focused on Western missionaries that they engage outside of the West cross-culturally, using exclusively the languages and resources of the people they're reaching in key ministry. So how this came about, I started ministry in Zambia in 1988, was struck by the cultural gap between us Westerners, I worked with a lot of Americans, and the Zambians, and how that wasn't being perceived. But yet the upper hand was maintained because the finance came from the Western people, and the language that people communicated in was in English. So I began then to see that although those two things facilitated a lot of the kind of project functionality, they at the same time left this barrier in communication.
Jim, can you contrast vulnerable mission with standard or traditional ways of doing missions? Compare and contrast those.
Right. Just to fill in there again, we founded the Alliance of Vulnerable Mission in 2007. And it looks at challenging the conventional mission approach. Mm-hmm. Contrast being what? That we in the Alliance of Vulnerable Mission like to take seriously use of local languages and use of local resources. Now, I say take seriously, I mean, of course, other people take this seriously also. But for example, there's one issue that I've heard raised at different times where you have to be under the local leaders. And if the local leaders you're under say that they want to engage with you in English, then of course you have to engage with them in English. So if you engage in your work using English, then the opportunities really of learning language, I'm thinking about the African context, are going to be minimal or disappear. And unfortunately, if that's not what you want to do, you will remain kind of prominent and the leader because English is our mother tongue. And in similar ways, of course, many of the people we want to reach in the majority world, Africa, for example, they're very interested in the money we have to carry. So if they say, well, we want you to do what we like and we want your money, and then you oblige by giving them money, then again, you are constantly buying power and authority for yourself. So that's what makes a stand that says, no, I'm not going to use English. I'm going to use your language, whether you like it or not. And I'm not going to bring any money, even if you don't like me for not bringing money. Really positions a missionary in a very different place to that which seems to be the norm.
It reminds me, Jim, of a story when I was ministering in Bosnia. We had Bosnian partners. We called them team members, and we treated them like team members, but they would come to our meetings, and the entire meeting was held in English because it's majority of them were American missionaries.
Yep.
And one day we just decided, you know what, we're going to start doing these team meetings in Bosnian. And a couple things happened. One thing is they started speaking in the meetings. I didn't realize how muted they were before until we made this switch. But probably more importantly, what we talked about shifted. Instead of it being a meeting about the struggles of American missionaries making a cross-cultural transition, we talked about our objectives as a mission. And it completely transformed what happened inside. Plus, the brand new missionaries who really didn't know culture yet, they no longer were loudly making strategy for everybody else. So I do think that language component is really, really strong. So that'd be a personal experience that I've had with this dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, we had a similar issue and we had staff meetings at the Bible college I was at for a while, and I introduced translation into Swahili, but it met really a lot of opposition from the local people because Swahili is less prestigious than English. So there you go.
There's an example.
Well, I do think we as Americans, I think it may be true for Brits too. We don't understand that there's different levels of respect accorded to languages. Probably because we're just overwhelming always in English. But when you go to I've been to mission conferences here where Spanish is the main language spoken. And when the shoe's on the other foot and you're not speaking the dominant language, it definitely unseats you from participation in a significant way. So,
Yeah.
So language is a piece of it. And the other piece of it is how we use finances and money.
I think you need both. I mean, there are people who are very strong on language, and there are people who are very strong on not using outside resources. But then the language itself is a resource. And in order to learn the language and get to a place where you can understand the language, you really cannot be working with resources because resources push you into areas in which the English is used and so on and so forth. So I think very intentionally we put the two together. It has to be both local language and local resources, not just one of them.
Let me ask a question about the resourcing piece then. So in the U.S. missions movement, I would say in the global missions movement, there's a lot of discussion about how there's a lot of wealth in the West. There's a lot of wealth in the Christian church. We need to free it up for the global church. Are you of the mind that we should just never fund local ministry, but that we should always just use resources that are locally there?
No. I think long before we get to that position, I mean, maybe one day it will be there. But if you have 100 missionaries in a certain country and everyone uses resources, then none of those missionaries is enabled to draw close to the people because that identity of distributing of resources kind of keeps them distinct from the population. So what we're proposing in the Alliance for Vulnerable Mission is that some missionaries be allowed to not play the resource game. Now, if, say, instead of 100 missionaries distributing resources, you have 95, then the other 5, they can still be giving as many resources. Yeah, the other 5 give their resources to the other 95, and the resources are still going there. But 5 missionaries are no longer identifying as wealthy benefactors, but then they're enabled as a result to draw alongside people without playing politics. Because, I mean, if you're potentially going to suddenly draw money out of your pocket, there's political maneuverings going all around you. In due course, after a number of years of consistently never suddenly pulling a big wad of dollars out of your pocket, people begin to relate to you normally and to trust you more and to be able to share things with you and share in a way with you that they wouldn't with this unpredictable money person.
So, Jim, what are some of the spiritual principles behind operating from this vulnerable stance that you're talking about?
Spiritually, I'd say biblically. When I think about the influential people in the Bible, the one who probably operated from a position of power was King David. But if I think of the other respected biblical actors, let's say Moses, Elisha, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, the minor prophets, Jesus, Paul, I think none of them behaved in the way that we Western missionaries do today. One, they didn't do their ministry on the back of a lot of resources. And two, they didn't introduce a foreign language. They were using the language of the people there. So the model of vulnerable mission in the scriptures is very normal. The difficulty we have had as Western missionaries is a kind of acclimatization to a situation in which our identity and our oomph comes from the ability to wield power in a way that's not biblical. So, of course, if you are wielding a lot of money, and as I say, English is money in today's world. And if you are fluent in English in Africa, you are A1 educated. Then you begin to not be forcing people to do what you want them to do. Now, of course, you don't absolutely force people, but the formula becomes pretty heavily loaded in one direction. You know, if you go along with me, I'm going to give you a scholarship. You're going to get a salary job. I'll write a nice letter to the donors and so on and so forth. If you don't, well, okay, go and do what you want to do, but you're not going to benefit from my largesse. That's why I say if there can be some missionaries who work with local people without that implicit forcing of following my agenda, then those few missionaries can begin to have better ears and better eyes and better understanding.
Now, I don't, maybe I shouldn't assume this, but I'm assuming this also has ramifications for the lifestyle that the missionary chooses when they live locally.
That's something that we don't, if you like, insist on. What we say in the Alliance of Vulnerable Mission is, if your lifestyle is embarrassing or will draw too much attention from locals, then kind of draw a line between your home life and your ministry life. I mean, local people where I'm in East Africa understand that us Westerners are habituated to a certain way of living, which to them is very strange and does use a lot of resources. So in that sense, the fact that the food you eat might cost 3 times as much as what local people eat, well, you know, you're a foreigner, you're strange. But then when it comes to ministry, kind of draw a line and say, now I'm in ministry mode. I'm going to adapt as much as I can to where local people are. And then you can shift back into your own kind of more Western way of living without implying that your Western way is better than their way, but just that it's different. And in due course, I mean, in my own case, I mean, I've lived for many years in an African village. I eat the local food, I ride a bicycle and so on. It does make things easier to function that way because you don't have to attract people's envy to all the time with all that such implies. And it's easier to get your message across. You know, I'm not going to give you any money, folks, which is difficult if you're evidently spending a lot of money on yourself. And again, I'm single, if you're spending a lot of money on your family. But we're not insisting that. We say keep that aside and do your ministry in a way that fits with the local context without implying that they should be living the way you are.
So, Jim, you use the word context there. So we often talk about contextualization in mission. What's the difference between what you were talking about, vulnerable mission, and contextualization?
Well, to me, vulnerable mission is the premier means of contextualization. Now, we tend to, I think, consider contextualization as kind of in an abstract, not exactly cerebral way, but, you know, we need to contextualize how we're going to do it and so on and so forth. Whereas, on the other hand, if you're practicing the principles of vulnerable mission, you arrive in a community, everyone isn't desperate to be your friend anymore. because you haven't got any money to hand out, and you are forced to use a local language. And when you use a local language, until you get a certain ability, you sound like a fool, you know. And in the process of trying to correct your communication, what are you doing? You're contextualizing, you're adjusting to the context, the linguistic context, the physical context, the social context, the historical context. That's a way of making progress. So it's not an abstract theoretical process. It's what a vulnerable missionary does in order to endeavor to thrive and to communicate honestly the gospel in a particular place amongst a particular people.
So on our call, I'm sure, on this call, we have people listening out there that are training and preparing missionaries. How would you suggest they go about counseling, advising people? Let's say they're doing first entry into a new culture. What are some thoughts that you would have for them?
There's a rub, I guess, in the West, because as I understand it, we're told, listen to the foreigner. I mean, that's good. When we're in the US or in the UK, listen to people and patiently try and understand them in English. Now, this has many drawbacks if you use English, because people are, one, speaking for money, and secondly, they're trying to think, well, which English word fits with the one I have in my home language? And that's only ever an approximate process. So you're getting a kind of some approximate idea of what's going on in that person's home country, if you like. Now, what was your question again?
Question is, how would you train people? How would you have people, new missionaries, think about entering into a new culture?
Inform people and make them aware of how people speak for money. Make your potential new missionaries aware of the issues of translation. And a translation is transformation. Translation, I mean, not that people are trying to deceive us, but it ends up being a deception.
Yeah.
Because you're hearing in your context what they're communicating in the light of their own context. So articulate to potential missionaries the very real and prominent issue that they have to get around in order to connect with the local community of people will speak to them, ask for money, and the transformational content of translation, which means they themselves, not a translator, not a local expert, they themselves, a Western missionary, needs to learn the language and use the language and not learn the language in the classroom. I mean, you might start in the classroom, but in order to be able to use the language as local people use it, you need to know how to use it in the context, which requires a missionary to move into that context. As I say, to leave aside the vehicle, the ice cream, and the computer, to walk, to cycle, some simple means to go by bus into an indigenous context and sink or swim, do what you can. It may be very discouraging. Well, the reason it may be very discouraging is because in that sense, unfortunately, much of the mission propaganda implies that it's a spreading of the gospel when actually people are responding to the resources and the language that we're using.
So, Jim, I imagine this is a significant challenge to missions organizations who've had a certain approach for a long time. I'm curious, how are people responding in the missions world to this approach of vulnerable mission?
Amongst missionaries, I think some people don't like it at all because it threatens, it undermines. If you want to consider yourself a success insofar as you've achieved X, Y, Z, and of course you don't want to say, well, I've only done it because I use English now for money, then vulnerable mission is saying, well, hang on a minute, what about this, and what about that, and what about the other? I mean, we're not saying every missionary needs to be vulnerable, but what we are saying is, can there be room for some people to practice vulnerability mission rather than those who are threatened doing all they can to oust them, for example. Now, I mean, when a missionary's been around for a while in the kind of context I'm familiar with, then they do begin to realize that there's a lot they're not getting, and that their endeavors may be working according to a Western kind of assessment. You know, the building's up and the students are there and so forth, but they're not in many ways connecting indigenously. Then those kind of missionaries start to say, hey, this vulnerable mission makes sense. And they want to benefit from the insights that the vulnerable missionary has.
If you're a senior leader, let's say you're senior leader of a sending agency, how should you be thinking about vulnerable mission in terms of what your whole organization is doing?
I think create an option, somehow communicate to the missionaries. We're also looking for those who want to work in a vulnerable way. And there may be a few who will put up their hand and say, hey, that sounds interesting. What's involved? More broadly, again, back to the same issues. Explain what happens when you translate. Explain what happens when you show up with a lot of money. And you have to explain also that the reputation of us Westerners in the parts of Africa known to me, it takes more than a day of not having money. You take 10 years of consistently not giving anyone any money before people actually believe you that you're not going to give anyone any money. So you're talking about a long-term investment. And linguistically, similarly, it takes a long time to pick up a language. Now, having said that, the people do enjoy hearing you use their language. And that in itself is a part of boosting the people rather than boosting, you know, doesn't boost the way it looks in America, but it boosts the way local people see it. And I mean, in circles I'm aware of, a lot of Western missions will start with a sentence or two of the local language and then they move into English. What about going all the way through in the local language? That's what's hard to find in parts of Africa known to me.
I would say the dynamic that globally, as I've observed it, I'd say it's true in other parts of the world, but I would say maybe not as much linguistically. In Africa, you can get away with a lot of English, but you go to a place like Bangladesh, you're going to have to learn the local language. However, because of poverty there, money has really kind of made mission, it's given it a very bad reputation to the point where I know mission teams that basically just say, we don't do any funding, we don't do any relief and development, we don't do any, in fact, we get jobs, we work in the local economy because, you know, so I would guess that this varies depending on where you are in the world in terms of, you know, whether it's language or the funding issue, that's the bigger one.
Right. Again, you can get by. You can get by in English in Africa.
Personal story. I was in India at a missions base in southern India, you know, lots of Christians there. It was a training base for national workers. And of course, mine's a short-term story. I mean, this is much different when someone's full-time, you know, many years in field. But at the training facility, the students were eating out of tins and they were eating with their hands, which is traditional. And there was a table set aside for visiting, you know, speakers. And I was one of those speakers, and they served me on a porcelain plate or something like that, and they made me chicken, and I'm really adventurous. So part of my rationale for this was I wanted to try the local food, but I approached my contact there and I said, listen, I don't want to sit at that table, and I don't want to eat fried chicken. I'm from the United States. Let me sit with the students. Let me eat their food. Let me eat with my hands. And he said, I'm afraid your gut won't survive this. He goes, but okay. And so for a week of training there and teaching, I had a translator, Jim. It was a short-term trip. But I got to know these students, and it was remarkable because when I left and I shared a final devotion, they introduced me and they said, this is Matthew Ellison. And he's just like Alexander the Great. And I'm like, what on earth are they going to say about me? They said, he came, he saw, he conquered. And this is what he said. His name was Ebby. He said, he sat at our table, he ate our food, and he conquered our hearts with his love. All I did was eat their food, Jim. I can imagine long-term, long-range, the impact that this is going to have when you're at the table, when you're entering into the culture. You know, it was just basic vegetables and stuff. But anyway, I just reminded me of that situation, and in a long-term context, how profound it could be when you truly enter into life with the people you're trying to reach.
It's a beautiful
Right.
story, Matthew, but it reminds me of when I took a train across India and I decided I was going to eat the food they serve on the train. And my host said, please don't do it. And then I spent the next 3 days puking my guts out because I couldn't handle it. So you never know how that was going to turn out. But
I've been there too, Ted. I've been on that side of things too.
he was wise in saying, I don't know if that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Right.
No, that's good.
I mean,
That's good.
we're saying be sensible. You know, you don't have to radically change your diet. People understand that you are different, but it does take time. And love the people, not by giving them money, not by showing them how good your English is, but by wanting to know their language and being there, even though some of them don't like you anymore because you're not giving them anything.
Yeah. I do think we probably have some listeners that think, well, I already do this. But they probably don't. They might, but I don't think we often observe how easy it is to fall into patterns we call it generosity from our perspective.
Yeah.
But it taints the relationship. That's particularly on the resourcing piece of things. So,
Right.
Jim, you've written about this.
Yeah, we have a lot of materials.
I'm sorry.
available.
Go ahead and say what you're going to say first, Jim.
When you talk to missionaries, some do say we do that. And partly they say it because they don't want you to explain in more detail what it is you're maybe asking them to do. Because to do it to the degree that we are advocating is, it's just beyond many. It's hard work. And you don't get results in the way you want to get results. And then your own donors, if they don't understand, then they no longer appreciate what you're doing, you can lose them and so forth. Anyway, yes, there's the Alliance for Vulnerable Mission website, vulnerablemission.org, that points to considerable amount of resources. I mean, follow the links, you'll find a lot of things that will articulate some of the reasons for some missionaries using local languages and local resources in key ministry.
Yeah, and Jim has a book, Vulnerable Mission for Practitioners, a simple yet challenging guide to cross-cultural service without dominance.
Right, this is edited by our new director and new board members. I was always defeated on how to write that book. I mean, I'm a contributor to it,
Okay.
but with a fresh beginning, they did what I couldn't conceptualize doing. Just the very practical, this is how to do it, this is how not to do it, and this is why. If you do it this way, this happens, so you do it that way instead, and so on and so forth. So yes, thanks for mentioning that very helpful book.
Well, Jim, thank you. This has been a challenging conversation, I'm sure, challenging for me and thought-provoking. So thank you for your work, for your willingness to share what you've learned, and may God bless the work of your hands, brother.
Thank you very much for your time. It's great to have this chat.
Before you go, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. The Mission Matters podcast is a partnership of 1615 and Missio Nexus. Check out 1615.org and missionexus.org for more resources on the mission of God and the matters of the mission. The Mission Matters podcast is hosted by Matthew Ellison, president of 1615, and Ted Esler, president of Missio Nexus.